Hello and welcome everyone to the internationalization session for SMEs, entrepreneurs, innovators, and business owners. This one, we are glad to have representative from ENRICH the executive director, Marco Quirino, and from Bridge In, which is a soft landing partner of ENRICH from Portugal, Pedro Henriques, its CEO. We're quite happy to welcome you here on board for this one, which is a major and critical service provided by ENRICH to our members and to whoever wants to actually be provided with these kind of services. We are going to look at the scenario of Portugal in itself. We have quite a few solutions offered by Bridge In when it comes to actually integrating a business overseas from Latin America specifically to Portugal through different mechanisms, and hopefully we'll get some cultural grasps as well, which is quite important when delving into these details. So I'm going to provide a word to the Executive Director of ENRICH Marco Quirino. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivan. Great to be here. Hello, Pedro. It's very nice to be here and interact with you, especially in this moment of the year in which we are already losing focus in business, so we can make a closure and obviously prepare the ground for 2024. So I think it's a good moment, and especially talking about internationalization, it's key for us. Internationalization is the main, let's say, proposal and main value proposition of ENRICH in LAC, which is basically bring together Europe and Latin America. And in this specific case, we are talking about maybe focusing on Portugal, which is the closest, I hope, or I think the closest from Europe and Latin America, Spain and Portugal. So it's good to be here. It's good that we are focusing on SMEs. We have this specific target and focus on supporting SMEs to be aware and be able to cross the ocean and somehow start understanding the business environment on the other side and maybe developing business together. So great to be here once again, and great to be with Bridge In, which is our partner on soft landing, and we have this very important, as you mentioned, Ivan, a very important focus on in a service that for us is critical. Obviously, as you know, enriching luck, which I understand you all know, but anyway, I'll repeat. ENRICH means, besides in English, being wealthier, let's say, but it means European Network of Research and Innovation Centers and Hubs. So our main focus here is to, through matchmaking, make possible that these innovation centers and hubs come together. And SMEs, with the support of our soft landing hub partners, are a way to make this happen. So, as enriching luck, we obviously, as I mentioned, we focus in innovation and internationalization, but we are an association. So as an association, we provide services, and some of those services or key services are basically executive education, in which we try to prepare and give tools to either to presidents of startups or directors, executives, or managers of companies that are willing to internationalize, to make their business more international. So we prepare those through executive education, webinars, trainings, and sessions to provide those tools to those executives. Besides that, we also provide funding solutions. We have partners to do that, and we also provide information on that. So funding, so we do not provide the funds, but we provide the solutions for those companies that are willing to be more international. And we also do that, always focusing on matchmaking. But to make this possible and all these services possible, there's a key service that we consider a key service, which is soft landing. Soft landing is key for those companies that are willing to do, let's say, that international step, but have to understand better before investing a lot of money or making sure that that decision is more assertive. So soft landing is key for us, and having a very, very strong, let's say, ecosystem of soft landing partners is of utmost importance, and having bridging within our team is even it makes us very proud. And again, Portugal and Brazil, if we think about not all Latin America, but Brazil and Portugal, we have all this common, let's say, background and the same language. Many times in some details on the differences on the language, but I think that we understood well if we didn't damage a lot the natural, let's say, the original Portuguese from Portugal. But I think we still can have a good conversation and understand each other. So it's great to be here. And again, always keeping in mind that we have some key areas as Enriching LAC and the European Commission and Europe have some key areas of focus, and industry as a whole, business as a whole, innovation as a whole, obviously, but we have some areas of more focus, which are health, bioeconomy, renewable energy, sustainable urbanization, and digital transformation. So these areas are of more focus, both for Europe and for Enriching LAC, and obviously these are projects that we are more interested in. But we are not closing any doors. Actually, what we want to do at the end of the day is bring together Europe and Latin America and Europe, and this is why we're here today. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all that are attending the seminar, and those who did not have the opportunity today. We are recording it, so it's going to be available for you and for your partners. And once again, it's great to be part of this session, especially with Pedro Henriques, that is going to provide his words and his let's say, thoughts on how we could make all this good, let's say, intentions reality. So thank you very much, Ivan. Thank you very much, Pedro. And it's great for me also to be here.
Thank you, Marco, for your wonderful insightfulness and presenting Enriching LAC, obviously, as the executive director. You are a main contact point for the organization, and hopefully if any participant is actually interested, we can exchange contacts in the chat to promote further intertwine of operations in Latin America and Europe. Obviously, that's the main goal of the network. And now I'm going to pass the word to Pedro, CEO at Bridgin. He is the man with the knowledge when it comes to actually setting up your business in Portugal, when it comes to know all the aspects, legal, financial, and cultural aspects of setting up a business in Portugal through many different or from many different places, especially Latin America.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. And thanks for the invite, and thanks for the very warm intro. Glad to be here on this panel and hopefully add some value to the people that are listening to us. So I'll be, I guess, your host for, a little bit over 30 minutes, hopefully not too long, and good information. I'll share the screen in a second, and hopefully you are seeing it by now. Red Steel Bridge, yeah, success. Okay, I see thumbs up. All right, all good. So I call you and join this from sunny Lisbon. You might actually see a little bit of sun still, warming a bit the heart. It's a bit cold. It's winter after all in this side of the pond. But talking about internationalization and soft landing and all of that, what I want to bring here today is, what specific, opportunities for Latin America entrepreneurs and, things that could be relevant for you to understand, when considering Portugal to soft land. Really brief context on who Bridgin is and, what we've been doing. And that helps, I think, not also guide potential questions and feel free to start, writing them down. We would be very glad to take those questions at the end. But, we do have my own background is in computer science, so an engineer by training. And the reason I started Bridgin was because, when someone needs to deal with international business and understand the barriers of entry, the unknowns, the bureaucracy, which is important, right? So laws make us safe, but we still need to know them and have a good process to address them and comply with them, right? And so all of that process can be sometimes a hurdle on businesses to expand to other locations. However, it is important to understand, obviously, there are great opportunities in, intra-country business, either to sell a new service or, just benefit from price arbitrage opportunities, obviously because of different moments in the different economies. Just a snapshot of the quick team. You will see here, from lawyers to accountants to payroll, content, tech, customer success. So, very holistic and very complete team, because we really want to work with our customers in, a lot of the different needs they have. And so just also a quick summary. And I think this is important, again, for you to have a notion, what are the typical problems that we solve and we see. We tend to work mostly with companies that are on a technology sector. It's not exclusive by any means, but it is true that, technology by its nature, it is easy to export, right? So it's easy to have, a team that is in multi-country and multi-sites to even, collaborate and, export that technology. When you have hard goods, there's obviously great opportunities there. And we do have companies we support that do sell, import, export goods. But, we do see, obviously, there's a bunch more concerns, right? So it's a little bit less, I guess, favorable or easy. Anyway, big part of what we do is to help, like I said, on the bureaucratic part, from establishing an entity, having work contracts, understand labor law, process payroll, understand accounting, taxes, months end, corporate tax, all of those matters, right? So I like to say, and you might still see on my background, one of the from Web Summit, which is obviously a big fair here, technology fair in Portugal. We like to say that we are on the payroll, legal, and tax space, bringing technology to it to make it more predictable, while it serves companies to address their needs. Anyway, really quickly, if you need to build a team, if you also need to relocate a team, and different countries in the world will be very different because of visas constraints. Obviously, within Europe, very easy, as we can freely navigate without passports within the Schengen area. Outside of Europe, obviously, that's not the case. And I'll talk briefly later on about what is employer of record, in case you don't know. Company soft landing is pretty much what is, I guess, the goal here. And then anything about managing the subsidiary and keep the operations going. Anyway, I don't want to get you too bored with this. So today, what we'll see is, first, a quick look at KPI. So what does Portugal has to offer? And I would assume some of this might already be, somewhat familiar, but I think it's always good, as Marco was saying, as we get here to the end of this year, right? Let's plan the next one, right? So let's have some good data points so that you can make informed decisions. So first of all is Portugal is a fairly secure and thriving democracy. Now, it is a fact that we actually will go to early elections in the spring, but still, regardless, you just saw that news from the rating of the sovereign debt that became better, right? So there is trust in the way the government and the country is faring, right? So it is also safe from a personal perspective, and I think that's something that the whole world knows, right? Because we have been, every year we are on the top 10. We were number 3 for a lot of time. I think we went down a bit. Right now we are the 7th safest country in the world, but still, obviously still very, very safe, right? And that when we think about people and businesses, and let's face it, business are full of people, right? One interesting thing that I realize is, you obviously like to go to a country if you need to become an expat. You like to go to a country where you have a better quality of living, right? And so Portugal is definitely one of those, right? So it is a very interesting and important country within the European bloc, where you can have, a safe environment for you personally, eventually for your family. And let's face it, it is also, when you compare cost of living, probably still, if not the most affordable country, at least in Western Europe. Some countries in Eastern Europe might be a little bit cheaper, but when you combine all of that, it's really hard to have an edge on Portugal. The other thing is, and we see a lot of that, we have in the last few years rising autocratization, with a lot of extreme in the politician, far left, far right, autocratic movements. Portugal still fares very well. in that. So we still have, a very well functioning liberal democracy. And so, that should give you the trust to come to the country. The other thing to add is, obviously, even if, some politicians can go a little bit sideways, do remember that Portugal is obviously within the European Union. So that also gives a bit of an umbrella from a regulatory perspective that, provides an additional level of trust and predictability. The other angle here is, I guess, very obvious and easy to understand, which is the location, right? So Portugal is on a very interesting intersection, and, history also, maybe that geographical is what, made in the history, those guys in the 15th century get into boats and navigate across the world. But it is indeed an entry to Europe because it's the closest, if you come from the Americas, both north or south, Portugal will be the first country in the mainland Europe, right? So both in time zone, but geographically speaking, right? But then also we have historical ties, obviously, with Africa as well. So it's also an interesting door for Africa. And this has multiple directions, right? So we talk and we see companies coming from Central Europe, sometimes, from or even the Nordics in Europe, like, could be Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, that look for Portugal like, okay, so I want to go to Latin America, and Portugal is not Latin America, but it's closer, right? So it's one step closer, both geographically, but even culturally, language-wise, right? So it's closer, right? And this is one of messages that I think it's really important for all of us to have. Doing business in other geographies, it's the language, and that's why we are talking English, which is the international language of business. But it's also culturally. And I can give you even, my own example as CEO at Bridging. We have fared very well. We have customers in 25 or 26 countries by now, very broad, from a lot in the Americas, a lot in Europe, also in Asia. We are struggling in Africa. I must be honest, I don't think we have any active customer there. We do have in the Middle East though. In any case, even with all of this, ability to address different concerns and different cultural aspects, we do struggle a little bit more in the DACH region that, covers Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Why? Because that, more German mentality is culturally different than the one in Portugal, right? And so it is important that, myself as an entrepreneur recognize that. And so one of the things we are doing is starting early next year, we'll have someone that is a German speaker that lived in the country for over 10 years that can help us address the culture of that country. Now, that is not a plan that eventually will work for everyone, because you want to at least to have an experience if it justifies the investment, and that's what we've done, right? So we do have countries in that geography, but to double down on it, we made the decision to have someone that is a native speaker. So just a word, appreciate the differences. Now, how does all of that relate to what we are doing here and talking today? Well, the fact is, Portugal, and if we are to talk about it, Spain, obviously will also be the closest to Latin America, both in language and culturally. There's no doubt about it, right? So more than Portugal or Spain, as a country, as an economy, it's the entry point to the European economy, right? So you can set foot in Europe and, trade in euros, which is obviously the currency that most countries in Europe have, but you have foot in the ground. And then, as you need to target a little bit more specifically a given market, as you evolve, you might want to go, double down on that, maybe have someone that is really good speaking French or whatever it is. But Portugal is a great entry, a great opening of your potential operation in Europe, okay? And, as it says here, obviously the European Union, it's still a big, very important economic bloc. The third thing, well, and I guess I already got a bit ahead of myself and talked about this, but indeed the high quality of living justifies why a lot of people are coming. And I can say something here different from what I said before, which is obviously the last few years have been very challenging and troublesome, right? For a lot, from a pandemic that locked us all inside to now the wars raging on East, but also obviously in Israel and Middle East. So all of that has caused, a lot of uncertainty and even a lot of anxiety, naturally. We've seen that countries that you feel safe, that you'll go to, that fortunately, Portugal is a bit outside of the conflict. So we are obviously, everyone is affected, but I feel like we are obviously a lot less affected than others. The other thing we saw that I would tell you that I would not believe if you tried to convince me 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. In the last 3 years, we saw a tremendous amount of expatriates to relocate to Portugal, namely, not only from Brazil, there's a lot, but also from North America, the Nordic countries in Europe. And that happens by, I think, a combination of motives. One that is, I think, no doubt important is the quality of living, right? And the cost. The second one, it's safe, the language, being removed. You can think that Portugal today, I don't think there is any country that is an antagonist, right? There's a lot of countries in the world that have countries that they don't get along very well. Portugal doesn't have any antagonists, right? I think we give well with everyone. And they even say that Portuguese passport is one of the most valued passports in the world because, we have all of these, good agreements with all countries. So it's very easy for us to get in with, minimum visas. Anyway, so that high quality of living, that safeness, the feeling at home does help that Portugal as a country, it is a receiver of migrants, which, increase obviously the opportunities as well. Already talked a little bit about this, but English proficiency, the language skills are also very relevant. And this is interesting because in here, we have a clear separation from what you'll find in other countries in the south of Europe. So typically, as you can see here, north of Europe, the non-English native speakers, right? So the north of Europe, typically they have very high English speaking skills. So you see Netherlands, Austria, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, all on top, right? But then number 8, it's Portugal. On the other side, if you look at Spain, Italy, France, they are 35 and 43 position. So it is much worse. And I did took a look before coming to here. I did check Brazil and Argentina, and unfortunately it is also a little bit lower according at least to this rank, fair or not, it's what is in this rank. And that is a great asset also in Portugal because you can easily find someone that speaks English. Anyone that is obviously a native will speak Portuguese. Most of Portuguese will speak at least a little bit of Spanish, and even a lot of times they can understand Italian and French. So the scope in terms of languages that you get in Portugal is very significant, all right? And that is not true, for instance, if you go to Spain. Obviously, they will speak Spanish, they will not speak Portuguese, and they speak worse English. If you go to France, they will speak obviously French. They will speak a little bit of English, but they won't speak anything else. And if you go to Germany, pretty much the same as France, right? So there is obviously as well notable advantages in terms of language. We already touched this, but time zone also closer. We are the same time zone as the UK, which is 1 hour closer to the Americas than most Europe, and even 2 hours closer than Eastern Europe. Obviously, Brazil and Latin America is kind of closest to these time zones. And so, today, I think with Brazil, it's a 2 hour difference. We were talking about that earlier on the call. But even, if you look at, north of the Americas, which is, a little bit to the west, even on, Central Time that covers Texas and a lot of Mexico, it's a 6 hour difference. So it's not as easy, but it's manageable, right? It starts to become a little bit bad with Pacific and Alaska time, which is 9 hours, 8 hours plus difference. But if that's hard, anywhere other place in Europe will be harder, right? So that's yet another advantage by the sheer nature of geography. Anyway, I live here. We did an interview, so maybe we can share this and people have access to the link. But we did a webinar a while back in the middle of a pandemic, actually, with John Graham Cumming, that is the CTO of Cloudflare, a company that moved to Lisbon. Himself, the CTO, moved to Lisbon, and they have, it's a big presence. One of the biggest of the company is the office they have in Lisbon. One of the things he says, as you can see on the quote, the stability, the immigration policy, the standard of living interesting enough, also direct flights, right? And so we do know the pandemic kind of reshuffle, and airports and airlines is a topic that we discuss a lot in Portugal lately. But obviously the ability to have direct flights, and typically Portugal through the national carrier does have a lot of direct flights with not only North America, South America, and also Africa. So that could be also an advantage. Anyway, those are the key, I guess, factors that I want to share to get into that perspective if they were not known already. Next, I will talk a bit about salary. So obviously that's really important. If you look at Portugal and you want to hire people here, it's kind of important to understand how much that would cost. As we work mostly with companies looking for tech talent, that's what I have today. But obviously this will be very different. It will be lower in any other function. As most of you might know, the dynamic of an employment in tech and outside tech is very different, right? Typically, there's always lack of software engineers, and sometimes there is plenty of abundance of other roles, right? So in tech, it is typically a workers market, so they can ask for more salary. In the other fields, is more an employer's market, right? Regardless of the information you see here, then I'll dig a little bit deeper in terms of all the costs of employing someone in Portugal, which will be relevant if tech or non-tech. Anyway, so I won't delve too much about all these details. I just want that if you're looking to potential hire tech, there's a few things that you should know. Number one, salaries have gone up a lot, right? So again, the last 3 years, the pandemic, the remote work, that caused an inflation in salaries, not just because of actual inflation lately, but also because companies, let's say that you are a tech company in London, right? And you have your workers typically going to the office. Now, if they work close at home, they could be on a flat in London, or they could be, in a beach in Algarve in Portugal, right? So why are you paying a higher salary for someone that is working from home, where it is kind of irrelevant because they are not going to the office because of, obviously the health concerns we had at the time. And so what that caused is that people, in Portugal suddenly could apply to jobs that they couldn't before, or people that relocated from other countries to Portugal. And that pushed salaries up because increase the addressable market that a tech worker could apply to. That dynamic is now subsiding a bit by two main reasons. One is there are a lot of companies more on a hybrid or back to office policy. So, that, work from anywhere, remote work is less of a thing. But obviously there was also, the tech sector grew a lot with the pandemic because of the need for technology, remote tools, things like Zoom that enables us to be talking. And, with the back to office, as you might know, has been a few layoffs in technology. And so that, subsides a bit the market. In any case, and these are, if you see the column with the red with the up and down arrows, you'll see this will be the delta, the variation on the upper limit of the salary since 2021. So in the last 2 years, and you see that the great majority went up, a few though went down. So last note I want to share here, hiring tech talent in Portugal will not be crazy cheaper than elsewhere in Europe. Right? It will be fairly comparable to Poland and even Romania, which are all countries that have a very similar, at this moment, GDP per capita. It will still, be cheaper than Germany, France, and particularly the UK and Ireland, but it is not the huge difference that there were like 5-6 years ago, right? So if you came to Portugal 8 years ago, you could, and you were in technology, you could have an approach to sell nearshore development or consultancy services with just benefiting from that price arbitrage. Today, not as true. Okay, and that's important also. If you are in the field, that will be important information for you to know. Now, getting a little bit more broader. Okay, but what are the employment costs? And so I'll take what is in tech, kind of an average salary for a senior engineer, 50K a year, which, by the way, it is significantly above the national average in Portugal. So don't be, okay, Portugal is a rich country. No, tech is a rich sector. It's a rich industry, right? So the average salary in Portugal is actually much lower. It is per month on the below 2K, which, if we have 14 months in Portugal, and so that would be, 20, between 20 and 30. So, significant less than this, even for, senior roles. Anyway, what you should know here is, when you look at the yearly salary, in Portugal, the salary are paid in 14 months, right? So obviously the 12 months of the year, plus 2 extra payments there are for the what is called the holiday allowance and the Christmas allowance. Traditionally, they were paid before people go on vacation, so typically in July, June, July, and then the Christmas before Christmas, which is typically paid on November. Now, there was in the last few years a few changes, so it is possible now to pay that instead of, double salary in those 2 months. You actually divide that across the year, so you get the same every month. But, when you do the math and when you sign the work contract and all, you will need to take into consideration 14 months. But, put it in another way, if you just look at the yearly, you just divide it by 14 instead of dividing by 12, right? So that's the easiest way to do the math here. The other thing that you should know is that although not mandatory, it is very, very common and actually expected for you to offer a daily meal allowance. The current, not recommended, but the current limit amount per day that is exempt from taxation is 9.60 euros per day. This is paid per working day. An average month has 21 working days, so 11 months of the year, because you take 1 month vacation. It will give you, a rough estimate of 2.2K a year in terms of benefit. Now, obviously this varies. If people are sick, they don't get this when they are sick. If they are on a parental leave, they also won't get this, right? So this can vary a bit. The other thing, and I mentioned about taxation. So the base salary is subject to taxation, both from Social Security contributions and personal income tax, right? The meal allowance, it is exempt from both. It is, however, only exempt from both up to this limit, 9.6 euros per day, and if paid on a sort of a prepaid card that can be used for pay for food, okay? So just some practical, I guess, challenges there, but this is obviously a great way to get tax efficiency, to get money across to your employees without anyone, neither the employee nor the company, to pay tax on top of it. So it's a great thing, although not mandatory, it is expected. And again, it's a great way to be tax efficient. On top of gross salary, there's a few other things. And this is where, let's face it, it is known, and there is a big discussion now, particularly with the elections coming, about, taxations, and maybe they should be, a little bit lower, but, until they change it, they are what they are. So what I'm presenting is, the current state of things. And so the big markup in terms of the gross salary are the contributions to Social Security. So from the gross salary you have as an employee in Portugal, 11% of it goes to Social Security. However, the employer also needs to pay an additional 23.75% to Social Security contribution. So the total contribution to Social Security is actually 34.75%, coming 23.75% from the employer side, 11 from the employee side. So this adds to the gross. So the 50K, it is actually 50 plus 11.875. And please, take this into consideration, because this is not negligible. The other things that are mandatory are a little bit less impactful in terms of amounts, but just so that the one thing that is striked out is the compensation fund. So this was something that existed up until, I believe, March this year. Not anymore. It's not canceled in forever, but it's kind of suspended. So, it will become permanent eventually. But the idea here is that there were like an additional contribution of about 1% of gross salary to compensation funds. And this was basically almost insurance money, but not a typical insurance. It was like, if the company went bankrupt, this would be money that the employees could access as a sort of an indemnification. So the government was, storing money on behalf of employees in case of, bankruptcy or whatever it was. They suspended it now. So now you don't need to take into consideration as cost. Then the other column we have here is labor insurance and medical examination. So you absolutely, and please, if you need to take anything out of this call, simple thing is this one. absolutely have labor insurance for every employee you have in Portugal, okay? Because if you don't, and they sustain any injury, you'll need to pay. Let's say that, employee has a serious injury and it's unfit for work. You will need to pay his salary in perpetuity for the rest of his natural life, okay? So you obviously don't want that liability. So please, 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 always make sure that you have a proper labor insurance with a reputable company. The other thing, the medical examination. So this gets into the health and safety at work, which is the employer is responsible to guarantee that the employee has the right conditions to perform his work and he's also fit for work, right? So the medical examination is typically, go to the doctor, okay, do you have any pains? You can move, like blood pressure, all of that stuff, you're fit for work. The health and safety could be more like if you have an office or a factory, you need to have proper lighting. If you have a share, the share needs to be decent. You can't be sitting 8 hours on a bad seat or something like that. So generally basic stuff. Sometimes can get a little bit nitty gritty, but nothing. The principle is you need to provide conditions and you need to prove by having an inspection yearly that you provide the right conditions to your employees. The last column here, private health insurance. So this is not mandatory, but is more and more expected, particularly in higher, more seniority roles, maybe less on entry-level positions. Okay, there has been also in the Portuguese society a lot of conversation about the national healthcare system, the private sector. Generally we still have a very decent national health system, but it seems that has been a bit of disinvestment from the government. So now what they say, at least on the news, is that 1/3 of the Portuguese have a private health insurance, right? Which is significantly up from recent years. So a lot of this, can be, if you are to be an employer in Portugal, offer this. The cost totally pays, the attractiveness you are as an employer pays the cost. Okay, so we would recommend you having it. Anyway, so in summary, let's say that you want to hire someone senior or, on a higher paying vertical, 50K, the total cost would be around 65. Rule of thumb, on gross salary, apply a 25% markup, and that is a very crude but good approximation to what will that position cost you. Now, this is not taking into consideration things like, laptops, monitors, or, a car, if it's someone that needs a car, or office space, or even like smartphone or communication packages, right? Do also take into consideration that by law in Portugal, you need to provide training to employees. And if you don't, you are liable to pay so that he can get training outside work. So, there's a bit of that accrues, but, let's face it, it's not like crazy money. So yeah, 25% on top, it's a perfectly good approximation. All right, so, sorry, I have one last one here, which is the nature of the net versus total employment cost. So in Portugal, although the contribution to Social Security is flat, so it's the same percentage regardless of your income level, the personal income tax is variable. So higher income levels have a higher percentage of the salary getting, to pay tax. It is unfortunate, but it is what it is. So what you see is, on lower salaries, the big chunk of it goes to net salary, but in higher salaries, more than half or about half gets stuck in taxes. Do note one thing: personal income tax is pure tax. Social Security contributions, it's not exactly tax, right? Depends on what side of the political spectrum you are. Obviously, the Social Security contributions do fund social functions, right? And this includes unemployment benefits, but also includes retirement, right? So in opposition to other countries in Europe where employers need to make payments to pension schemes, in Portugal, all of that is typically included in Social Security, right? So it does cover a lot of things. It is, significant, but it does cover a lot of things, okay? So, the state in Portugal still covers a lot of those basic needs, from health, from unemployment benefits to retirement, pension, and all of that. Now, employment contract. So what do you need to know? This is, I'll try to summarize this. Hopefully I'm not losing anyone. This can be a little bit overwhelming, but So key things that you should take from this. There are essentially, in terms of work contracts, 3 types, okay? Which are actually 2 types, and one of it divides into other. So you have permanent placement, which is typically you employ someone and it's forever and ever, almost like marriage, right? And that is what should be, according to the lawmakers, the default work contract. So they expect people to engage on a contract that is for life. Let's face it, that sort of dynamic feels a little bit weird nowadays, right? Most people now don't work on the same company forever, but that's still kind of the default of the, all the framework around labor law. So the basic standard default contract is a permanent placement or an indefinite work contract. This does not have a limit, okay? What is the problem with this? The problem with this is you can have significant trial periods, up to 6 months for skilled labor. Typically it will be 3 months, but anyone that is doing a highly qualified position can be 6 months, and this can actually be 9 months if it's like a director level position. But beyond the trial period, it can be a bit hard to let people go, right? Obviously, if the employee is, robbing you or, beating or sexually harassing anyone, those are obviously reasons for termination, right? But things that are not like as clear, like, maybe that work is underperforming a bit, right? And it can be hard to go different ways if the employee does not want to be let go, okay? If there is a major event on the company, like a restructure that you need to do significant layoffs, or if you need to close a business operation, a vertical within the group, that's different, okay? Typically, the law in Portugal doesn't want you to make personalized decisions. And there's a few things in the law that provision for this. So you kind of can let go a group of people, but it's harder to let go an individual, which might seem counterintuitive, but it's actually the truth. The other thing about this kind of group mentality is that a lot of those benefits, for instance, the meal allowance and the private health insurance that I mentioned earlier, you need to typically offer to everyone or to no one. Now, you can segment it. You can, for instance, say that, okay, so the private health insurance is only offered to director level and above. So you can have rules like this, but what we can't have is to say, João has a private health insurance, Maria does not. Arbitrary, okay? So the individualization, it's generally very not good, very not legal. Anyway, so back to the work contracts. So permanent is the default. The tricky thing about it is that it can be hard to let go, to unilaterally terminate an agreement if the employee does not want to be let go. Then you have the contracts with an end, which is the fixed term, or a contract that has a determined, predefined end, or uncertain term contracts. Why do they exist? Let's say that you want to hire someone in Portugal for 6 months for a campaign, whatever it may be, and you know that you'll need this person for 6 months and 6 months only. That is typically a good justification to have this sort of work contract. Now, I tend to say that the fixed term contract is the worst type of contract. Why? Because you do still have a trial period, but it's much shorter because it's related to the duration. And so month 2, actually that person is not working out, you can't let go. You need to have the person for the 6 months. So again, the termination is tricky. Uncertain term contracts. So these are contracts that have an end, but the end is not clear. Okay, a good example for this is let's say that you have a worker that is replacing someone that is on a long sick leave, right? Someone that maybe has a serious health problem, and you don't know if they will be away for 3 months or 2 years, right? You could hire someone to replace, and that contract will end when the regular person for that position will be back from leave, and so that would justify the uncertain term. And so typically this goes to address temporary increases in need that do not have a well-defined end. So these are typically the 3. Then you can have more short-term contracts, like things, or even part-time contracts. So this can get a little bit fuzzy and complex, but the main ones on a more stable perspective, this is what you need to know. Now, there's something else, a very common topic that we hear in Portugal that I want to address, which is what is an independent worker and what is the misclassification of independent workers and what are the risks? So, by the law, if a contributor, and I have this written down here, so if someone is working for you and one of these can be proved, and these are, if they work at your facilities, your office, your factory, whatever, if they or, and note, or not and, any of this. So if they either work at your facilities or they work with your tools, let's say a laptop, or they follow your schedule, they start at 9 a.m. because you tell them to, or they receive a fixed salary, or they have a management position, all of this is enough to prove that they are a dependent worker, okay? And if they are a dependent worker, they cannot be an independent worker, right? So if you have them classified as independent workers, you've basically misclassified them. What does that mean? It means that you are subject to fines up to 60K. In practice, do I see this being, called and companies paying it a lot? I do not, but it's in the law, right? So you should, be very aware of it. The other thing here is, besides dependent workers, there is also the notion of financial dependency. An example, let's say that you have a liberal profession like a lawyer or an architect. Let's say that you want to buy or create, construct a couple of buildings, and so you have an architect working for you, and on a given year, over 50% of that architect income was coming from you. Okay, even if that professional might be a true independent worker because they don't work at your facilities, they use their tools, they work at their time, and they bill by the hour, so they are independent workers. There's no problem there, but there might still be a financial dependency. In those cases, you are liable to pay Social Security for that person, and this is something that is more recent in the law, and that a lot of companies get a really bad surprise later on, right? Because they don't expect it, right? And the idea here of the government is to try to fight against misclassification and people that sometimes use this sort of regime to try to pay less tax. Okay, so are people doing this? Yes. Is it legally? No. Are you getting potentially significant risk? Absolutely. So we obviously never advise, if you are engaging with someone that is a dependent worker or has a financial dependency, be very careful. Finally, we sometimes hear as well the idea that of B2B transactions. So this would be the case that instead of you employing someone, the contributor you want to work with has his own company and invoices you from his company. So this, in the eyes of the law, is a little bit better. Why? Because that person under his company, has a work contract and pays Social Security and pays, taxation and all of that. However, the reason why this sometimes exists is to try to optimize tax and pay tax as a company and not as an individual. So pay corporate tax, which is lower than personal income tax. However, again, the government understands this, and so there is something called the fiscal transparency regime, which is if they find that you are in such tax planning, they will force you to pay personal income tax. So any of those so-called tax planning goes completely away, any advantages. So I see a lot of companies, a lot of individuals not properly being either advised or thinking about this. Be very careful, because there's a lot of liability that you'll not be hit in a few months. It will eventually take a few years, but when it comes everything accumulated. So it will be very bad surprise to have at a later date. So be careful, get yourself informed if you are to employ people in Portugal. All right, so hopefully that was not too boring. We are getting here to the end of this. I just have a couple of ideas to share to you about different approaches that we at Regine have worked with companies to help them get into the country. One of them is to use employer of record. So why is this? And this is something that, this concept grew tremendously also in the last few years. Let's say that you want to come to Portugal. But you want to test the waters to see how it grows. So you don't want to go through all the trouble of incorporating a subsidiary just to employ maybe 1, 2, 3 workers, right? Because now we need to. Why do you want to deal with incorporating subsidiary, legal tax, and all of that? So an employer of record is a company that you use to employ these people on your behalf, right? And so that's an interesting approach to test the waters into a new market. We have done quite a bit of this, and I'm very happy to say that this has helped bringing more companies to Portugal that otherwise, because of the barrier, the jump would needing to be bigger, they would not pull the trigger and move. When we lower the risk, when we make things simpler, obviously companies invest more because the uncertainty is reduced, right? So sometimes when companies decide this, they might think even to relocate some people. We did see a lot of that because of the conflict in the east of Europe, right? So a lot of companies that have significant operations in Ukraine, trying to relocate people. So how you start a new hub in Portugal could be actually relocate part of the team. And so if that's the case, you'll need help with visas, with resident permits and all the registrations. And, we can totally do that. Then you could use, if that's the case, as Portugal as a base, to have, regroup your team. Or you can, you might not need to relocate anyone and you simply hire already people in Portugal. If, while you are building their team, you can totally use an employee of record so that, you focus on getting the talent you need, you focus on proving the market before committing to go all in with a subsidiary. But as most of the times happens, gladly, most of the companies we work with do get that stability. They become very happy to be in Portugal because they find the talent they need, they find the market to be relevant, and so they end up deciding to incorporate their entity. And so we also do that for them. And that stage basically is we help them create a subsidiary, move people that were employed through us to be directly employed by the new subsidiary, and we can still run the monthly payroll, the tax, the accounting, all of that. So all the bureaucratic stuff, we can take care of it, but we can offer slightly different solutions depending on your needs and your life cycle. Again, this is, I feel, a huge, interesting plan for you to decrease your cost and your risk and test new market, right? You don't need to be, okay, now I need to stop everything I'm doing, learn about Portuguese law, learn about labor law, and take 3 to 6 months to incorporate the subsidiary to then only after employ the first employee. No, you can find someone, employ them within weeks, see how that goes. Maybe it's a sales rep, maybe it's some other role, maybe you have customers in Europe that you want to support from a more close time zone. And then, as that proves to be businessly valuable, you can, double down and continue to grow. So, I just want to give you that insight because this is still not super commonly known. The last thing I have here for you is subsidiary creation. So, okay, never mind all of that EOR multi-stage process. I'm fully committed. I want to hire 50 people in the next 6 months, so I want to create a subsidiary. Okay, so what do you need to know then? Subsidiary creation, in opposition to what sometimes you might hear on the news, it will not take 1 day or 2 days. I mean, it can, but 99% of the times, particularly for you that you're not a resident, it won't, okay? And I'll get more to that. Give yourself a little bit of time. Don't rush. This is important, right? So we like to typically give 4 to 6 weeks for a company to be fully operational, then 4 weeks to sort out all of the HR part. And all the HR part is understand work contracts, sign all the work contracts, do those agreements with all the insurance, the labor insurance, the health and safety at work, the benefits for the meal card, figure out all of that. And then finally, you can onboard people, they can start. And, if we are doing this for you and you want to trust us, we can do the ongoing payroll. Then it gets into a steady state every month. About incorporation, and I think, I still have a little bit of list here. So there's a ton of stuff. So why is it not really a fact that you can create a subsidiary within a matter of days? If I, Pedro, a resident and a citizen in Portugal, I want to create a company, can I create it in a matter of days? I can. But it will be a company that is pre-built almost. right? So it's like a boilerplate company with a predefined name, with predefined articles of incorporation, okay? If I want a custom name, I need to ask a name admissibility certificate. That takes 1 week, okay? If I want to have custom articles of incorporation, I need to also get someone to write them, typically a lawyer, right? That's, we have our lawyers do them, and then you need to submit them. So there goes two weeks, right? So you see what I'm getting, right? It's already 3 weeks. And we have not even talked about who owns the company. Because if I, Portuguese citizen, want to create a company, the Portuguese government already knows everything about me, right? So all of my, citizen ID, my tax number, all of my tax payments all over the time I've been in this country. But if you're a foreigner, they don't know anything about you, right? So the first thing you need to do is you need to get local numbers. So you need to get a local tax number, and you need to use that. Now, then it also depends on who is the holding entity and who is the managing director. A managing director obviously is one or multiple individuals, right? So all the managing directors of the new subsidiary will need to have a local tax number, okay? How do you get a local tax number? If you can come in, you'll get it faster, 1 to 2 weeks. If you do it remotely, it's possible, but it will require a lot of paperwork, namely signatures, recognized by notary, apostille at the embassy. So you don't need to travel, but you'll be visiting a lot of places to get, all the stamps and stuff that you need. And then you have the holding for the company, which is, do you have the local subsidiary to be owned by your company in Brazil, Argentina, or elsewhere? If so, we need to get your company abroad recognized locally. So same history. We need to get them a tax number. We need to get documents that certify that the company exists. Okay. If you individual as a flesh and blood person wants to be the whole holder of the company and you are actually the MD, well, then you only do that effort one time. But still, both MDs and holding entities need to be recognized locally. So if you're not locally, you need to add that to the time, right? And so you can, as you can see, this easily crops up to be 4 to 6 weeks, okay? The last note that I want to say here, or two last notes in terms of incorporation, is you do need in Europe to submit information regarding the ultimate beneficiary. So if you have a complex holding structure, you need to identify the actual person all the way back, through the holding structure, okay? And this is also requisite to open a bank account. Opening a bank account is typically one of the most delayed processes. I can tell you one thing that, obviously we know, everyone, I guess, watches the news. If you are, for instance, a citizen from Russia trying to open a bank account, it will be next to impossible currently to open a bank account, okay? Most banks will reject, as they say, reserve the right not to open a bank account because of, all the penalties that exist. Now, coming from Latin America, there's no such problems, but typically banks do ask for a lot of information. So that will not be, and they also like to do things on site. So they like wet signatures, they like to be sitting next to you. So that is still a little bit painful. So, let's face it, I don't want to motivate you to come here. I just want that you understand. Is it doable? Absolutely, yes, right? What I think you should is, during this incorporation process, plan to be at least 1 week to sign stuff on the site, to get NIFs, go to the bank and all of that. If you do that, you'll save a lot of time. It will become a lot more efficient. And then if you use, a good partner, like ourselves, right, you'll get everything prepared. You just come in, go to places, sign stuff, and you don't need to worry, right? So a good preparation makes this a lot less painful, but there are a lot of check boxes, okay? And so it's important to understand that. I won't go through all of details here, as I also reckon that we are moving fast and I want to give time for questions, but yeah, last one here. So to recap, why is Portugal a good business destination? It is the stability, good or worse, we've been very stable. It is the location, so that bridge between, the Americas and Europe. The talent, we do have, generally speaking, very good education. good in STEM, science, technology, math, but also in other areas, the language skills, all of that. And then culturally, we are obviously closer, to Latin America than other countries in Europe. So that does help, getting, understanding and be able to get your business. Anyway, just to wrap up, my name is Pedro, a founder and CEO at Bridgin, and I would love to take your questions now.
So everyone now has got the allowance to speak and can address Pedro, obviously. Actually formulate your questions. You just can unmute yourself or write your question if you wanted it to be written, and off you go.
Just is it possible to have a broad screen with everybody open, or it's not? Just a question.
I'm not sure
because we have Pedro sharing his screen.
Yeah,
so
I'll stop.
I don't know if it's.
Is it better now?
we can.
I think it's working. I think we have everybody there.
But no video.
Yeah, and no, I don't see many open cameras. Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible for them to.
Oh, sorry, I don't mean to bother. Let's just move ahead with the questions.
Yes, please. Very happy to take any questions. And you can speak Portuguese also if you want. We're just making this in English so that, people that don't speak Portuguese can follow up. But, happy to speak in Portuguese as well.
Oh, I have one question here, and would like to ask you, Pedro, if it's possible. From your experience, let's say, how do you see this process, the migration? Obviously, you showed us a lot of details on the opportunities and all the challenges and also the difficulties that might have a company to come. But from your experience, companies tend to come, and once they do the soft landing, the trend is to stay and to keep doing business in Portugal and in Europe as a whole. How is your experience? So not only the journey of the soft landing, but also after that.
Yeah. No, that's a very good question, and I think there are very different situations happening, right? Depends a lot. The critical success factor for me is coming to the country with the right expectations, right? How do you come with the right expectations? Well, you do your due diligence, right? Again, I like to think that we provide very good expectations, the good, the bad, and the ugly to our customers so that, they come in. And so if you have very good mapping, what to expect, things kind of unfold very closely to what you expect, right? So you don't have a lot of unpleasant surprises. So, I can tell you that all companies that we helped to soft land in Portugal, they are still here and they are growing. Okay, we actually have what I like to say 0% voluntary turnover, which means is a big buzzword. What it means is no company that started working with us has left us. That still needs our services has left us. Unfortunately, early this year we did saw one or two companies in tech that did layoffs, and so they stopped having. Maybe they had one person in Portugal and they stopped having it, right? But anyone that was a little bit more serious and built a team, all of them are still in Portugal. Okay. Now, if I try to answer your question in a different way by broadening a little bit by other things I've seen, there is a slightly known case of a company from Germany that came to Portugal in probably 4 years ago. They had big plans. They tried to hire the very best in the market, but then things didn't work out and they left. And different people have different things, but what I did talk with many people, including the local country manager, and you'll understand that I'm not taking names. I don't want anyone to be upset here, but what I think is the key learning to get from that is it was a cultural difference. Okay, so they came to Portugal not necessarily understanding or appreciating the differences that exists in the workers and the teams in Portugal and in Germany. Typically, workers in Germany are used to a very structured top-down, a more industrial mindset, right? In Portugal, let's face it, we are a lot Latins, right? We are very South Europe, right? We don't like to be told how to do every single thing, micromanaged, right? We like, a bit of trust and even, liberty to do things. But I don't think that's negative. That is not to say that we are not good workers as all. It's just think that culturally we are different, right? And so that needs to be appreciated. You can't go to Japan trying to sell things as you sell in Brazil, Argentina, or in Portugal. It's impossible, right? So key thing is come to the country with the right expectations. Get good advice. That's critical. When you do come with the country with the right expectations, success is not guaranteed, but it's pretty, close to at least, not having bad surprises. So yeah, it's all about that. Final note there. I do know that a company that started here and scaled a little bit the size, and I will, for everyone's benefit. So in their case, they are a small company from Malta, and they're looking for Portugal to expand to a bigger market. And they're still here, but they expected to grow a little bit more their presence in Portugal, right? Their challenge was that in Malta, they had very little competition to the services they were selling. Portugal, although definitely not the biggest economy in the world, it is a bigger economy than Malta, right? So you have more competition, right? So the market share they were expecting to acquire, they did not. Now, let me put this in another way about opportunities. Companies coming from Latin America, usually all countries are, I would say, bigger than Portugal, right? So you are used to higher competition. Different, it's Europe, it's Latin America, fine, but you are used to a lot of companies and competition, bigger economies, right? So you actually don't have those problems. I can give you one example that is very noticeable. I do recall, again, my background, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a software engineer by training, right? So I've built plenty of software engineering teams. And I recall precisely one very interesting thing. When we started to have a lot of companies in Portugal that have solutions, that require a lot of cloud, scaling, like big e-commerce shops and all of that, it was not easy to find people in Portugal with that sort of expertise. Why? Because smaller economy, smaller companies, smaller e-commerce sites, right? You go to Brazil and it's huge, right? So DevOps engineers in Brazil have huge experience dealing with massive infrastructure. So they are amazing resources coming to Portugal and support these businesses. So there are opportunities. The thing is, think about the right way, what the market has, the pros and cons. Think Portugal as an entry to a wider economy. I will tell you that you should try to look, maybe you want to test your service market, whatever it is in Portugal, but think Europe. Don't think just Portugal. Portugal is not the biggest economy, right? So good entry point should not be the end point, okay? Cool, and I think we have another question here. So if we help startups to set up entities in Portugal, absolutely, yes. I can give you a little bit more information about startups, which I think is relevant. So there is every country now, I guess, at least in Europe, is trying to attract startups, right? Obviously, it's a big promise in terms of the economy and all of that. And so there are particular special programs to startups. There is actually even a startup visa, right? So people that want to get into the country to launch a business, you can apply to that entrepreneurship visa to get started. The challenge sometimes with startups when you're starting, obviously, is that, it's the amount of funds you have, right? So it's always that sort of thin balance between getting started. I would typically advise to try to get included in one of the incubators. We do have plenty of incubators in Portugal. Another thing that, more on the startup side of things, Portugal is a little bit, when you think about all the startup, ecosystem, Portugal is very interesting by the size, again, of its economy and population, but is still a little bit late to the game. So the ecosystem is not as mature as obviously San Francisco or London or other places, but within what the market is, it is very interesting and probably with a higher growth trajectory. Where does this show, this maturity? It shows on the scaling up. So in terms of starting up, incubation program, ideation, very good. Very good, Portugal, okay? There's plenty of incubators, there's a lot of networking, a lot of events, a lot of support from the community, easy to get around, no problem whatsoever. When you're looking to scale up, you don't have enough traction. We do say that we have 7 or now 8 unicorns. Let's face it, only one still has the HQ here. And so, you know, it is what it is. So because the economy is smaller, companies sometimes tend to go abroad to scale, right? So which doesn't mean that they don't keep a lot of team here, right? So sometimes they keep hundreds and hundreds of employees here, but they might move the headquarters elsewhere to get funding. And I think, and that must be true, right? So if we are looking at, you know, more pure, you know, VC, highly leveraged plays in terms of a tech startup, the United States, it's obviously still where money is more readily available. There's no denying of that, right? Europe tends to be a little bit more conservative in terms of investment, and Portugal within Europe does not, you know, fail that general trend, right? But still, so if you were to tell me, okay, I need to raise millions and millions of funding, should I go to Portugal or to the Bay Area in the United States? I think the answer is pretty clear, right? But if you go hire people in San Francisco, it costs a ton more money than in Portugal, right? So again, you know, there are different solutions and different, you should think globally. Don't think one location, use the multiple locations in the world to your benefit. Hopefully that addressed the question.
If I may, again, just another comment here. Obviously, Portugal is clearly, we perceive, and after your presentation, as a bridge. No, it's not by chance that the company is called Bridge In. But anyway, right. I think that Portugal is a great option, especially from Latin America to Europe, entry point, perfect. Do you have any concern on obviously the culture is very similar too, but and there is this fit that you mentioned, but any concern related to any, let's say, reaction on the day-to-day activities in the streets? Do you have any concern, or do you have any, you foresee any kind of difficulty in adapting or the way the Portuguese people is going to receive the Brazilian people? We've seen some very right things here in the news that I believe it's something very let's say exceptional, especially if we think that the companies are going to go and invest and go and support even the Portuguese economy. But do you see as a concern?
That's a super good question. Really, thank you for mentioning that, because I haven't touched that, and that's definitely important. So, you know, things are what they are. I don't think there is a big concern, but, you know, let's delve into a little bit deeper, right? So everyone carries its bias, right? Are they fair? Most likely not. Most of the times they are not, but everyone has it, right? And so Portugal is also traditionally a country of migrants, right? So a lot of people went to France. A lot of people went to, you know, Boston area, particularly from the Azores and Madeira, right? For instance, in France, there is a bit of bias against the Portuguese. Why? Because the first wave of migration was unskilled labor mostly, right? So it was, you know, working on, you know, construction, working on cleaning, you know, so unskilled labor. So they still probably have that sort of mindset looking at Portuguese, oh, you know, the unskilled guys coming here. Now, more recently, Portugal has a wave of skilled labor migrating. Interesting enough, not as much to France, but a lot more to the UK. So the UK, when they look at Portuguese, they don't look as, you know, as much as the unskilled, but more like, you know, actually skilled labor, because that's what they see. You know, the Portuguese that they interface are the latest wave on migration that started, you know, with the sovereign debt crisis about 10 years ago. And so this, no doubt, creates, you know, a bit of a bias, or at least a perception. Portugal, a lot of Portuguese, you know, in the beginning of the last century also migrated to Brazil, right? And I think they are known to have bakeries, padarias, right? So it's a very traditional Portuguese business. And so those things exist, right? So the way I think, particularly from Brazil, given the same language, the way that is seen in Portugal is, obviously, if we go, you know, a few years back, a lot of migrants to Portugal were not necessarily skilled, but that has changed tremendously, right? And I think the perception of the market is changing, right? As the other countries change the perception about the Portuguese as well, right? So we have plenty of companies now hiring very skilled labor coming from Brazil, entrepreneurs, typically two areas that have, they say a lot of people from Brazil are Braga up north and Cascais near to Lisbon. And so do I think there is, some bias here and there? Eventually, we also need to frame this in a wider tendency of the world, right? We do watch far-right movements growing a bit everywhere in Europe, right? A lot of it may be manipulated, by Putin or whatever may be, but we do see, some of that sentiment. So, maybe that just fosters it. I personally don't feel it's a problem. What I can tell is that there is plenty of companies that hire folks. They don't care about the nationality. But, I won't tell you that there is none, right? So I feel, regardless, I will tell you that if we do see in Portugal some, examples, by the way, if we're talking about violence, that's almost non-existent. Again, Portugal is very safe, right? But if you are talking about, like someone saying something that they should be quiet about, some bad thing, we might see a little bit more of that towards Asia. Folks from Bangladesh, India, and a little bit of that, because let's face it, they are, they have a different religion most of the time, so they are a little bit farther apart, right? And what you need to know is Portugal, from a demographic standard, it's still very, and this is in opposition to other countries in Europe, we are very similar, right? Like 90+% of Portuguese are, Portuguese, Catholic, even if they don't go to church, so it's very similar on itself, right? And in opposition to other countries where we have different, ethnic groups within the country, we don't have a lot of that in Portugal. Regardless, I feel there is very little problem. I feel like most countries in Europe are way worse. Actually, let me just add this, a different way to look at this. Culturally speaking, when you look at countries that are bigger economies like Spain and France and Germany, and I think those are the key ones, they are typically very proud as a people, right? It feels like the French still want to run the world, right? They still want to be a superpower. The Germany, kind of the same. The Spanish, still recall when, centuries ago, they were like dividing the world and fighting with all of that. So they are still very proud of themselves, and that makes them a little bit less receptive to expats. I feel Portugal kind of gave up to be a significant power in the world decades ago, right? And so that makes us, not being as, uptight, if that makes sense. In another sense, you need to think that Portugal and big cities like Lisbon, Porto, they are port cities, right? And historically, we always benefited from trade, bringing goods from other locations, right? So if you today go to Lisbon, in a lot of regions, you'll hear more English than Portuguese. And some people dislike that, right? I feel most of the sentiment against expats, it's not because of the expats themselves, it's because of the cost of living and the rising cost of buying a house or renting a house, right? Because again, Portugal is such a welcoming destination, good weather, safety, everything we mentioned. A lot of people have moved in, sometimes people with higher purchasing power, cost of living has gone up, at least the cost of buying a house in center. So living in city center, Lisbon, it is very expensive, right? And so some people that were used to it now say, oh, those migrants come here, now I can afford the house. But it's a economic thing. I don't think it's a, expat or what they say, racist or whatever thing, Anyway, yeah, it is, we see all over Europe tend to grow slightly. I feel like we are still on a little bit of a piece of heaven with little problems, but it's not zero, right? I don't think anywhere is.
No, Pedro, as a Brazilian, I was in Portugal for the last 2 or 3 years, 5 times or 6 times. I never felt any kind of rejection, any kind of any in any sense. So always very welcome. But again, I tell you, sometimes here in Brazil appears one case in an airport, one case, but overall, it's a very welcoming country, especially to Brazil, because there are and the Latin America, because there are so many things in common. So that's my
It's the
perception.
closest. Let's face it,
Yes.
right? So there is no country in the world culturally closer than Spain, Brazil, and the rest of Latin America. It's the closest we have, culturally speaking, right? It's definitely, and that's, by the way, let's maybe end here. I know, Ivan, if you want to do the honors to end this, but let me just maybe share this last thought. We are definitely closest to Latin America and to Spain than to Germany. No questions about it. No questions about it, culturally speaking, okay? Maybe we are closer to Germany, geographically, but culturally, no questions about it. And that is important to understand, right? There will be no one that is closest culturally, way of talking, way of doing business, how we talk, and even the food we eat, it's the closest. There's no other chance about it. So, invest, come visit. Portugal is a good entry point to Europe, and hopefully, the session today was helpful for everyone.
Thank you so much, Pedro. That was a delight to listen to you and to listen by employee of record and all the different mechanisms you've followed through during this session. I suppose everyone got a bit of knowledge that didn't have before. Later on, this session will be available on YouTube for everyone to see and to share ad eternum. So definitely thank you to Marco as well, and to everyone that has participated. If anyone wants to follow up on this session as well, we have displayed our contacts on the chat. So any queries or questions that may come, please submit them. Thank you. And
thank you, Ivan. Thank you, SPI.
Thank you all. Here.
Bye.